There is a small brass switch on the wall of every critical facility that no one is ever supposed to touch, and at 6:52 on the most important night of Dax Merrill's life, he ordered a man to touch it. "Bypass the interlock," the CEO said. "Keep the room online through the demo. That's an order, Wes." Wes Caro looked at the switch. Then he looked at the temperature reading climbing on the wall display 79 degrees in a room that lives at 72. And then he looked at the 38-year-old founder in the $400 hoodie, who had just told him to remove the one safety system standing between a data center and a fire. "No," Wes said. "I didn't ask." Dax stepped closer, voice dropping so the investors touring the glass gallery behind him wouldn't hear. "Follow my orders or leave. Pick one, right now." And Wes Caro, 51 years old, Chief Critical Facilities Engineer, the man who had kept the Basalt facility alive for 9 years without a single second of unplanned downtime, did the thing that no one in that control room was ready for. He took his badge off his lanyard, set it on the desk beside the keyboard, and quietly logged out of his console. He didn't argue. He didn't warn them. He picked up a canvas bag, put a coffee mug, and a photo of a teenage boy into it, and walked out through the glass gallery past a row of venture capitalists who had flown in to watch this facility be flawless and out into the parking lot. 91 minutes later, in front of every one of those investors, the Basalt facility began to cook itself alive. And the reason Wes Caro could walk out without a word, the real reason the one Dax Merrill never once considered when he decided the quiet engineer was safe to threaten, is the best idea in this whole story. He'd made himself impossible to own, not with money, by giving everything he knew away. Wes Caro ran the room that ran everything, and almost nobody in the building understood how important that sentence was. Basalt was a data center, a windowless concrete box the size of 2 football fields humming with tens of thousands of servers that did not belong to Halcyon. They belonged to Halcyon's customers. Somewhere in those racks was a bank's overnight processing, a university's research cluster, a streaming service. Nobody would name, and this is the one that matters, so hold on to it. The live patient systems of St. Bridget's Children's Hospital, the monitors, the medication records, the machines that go beep in a pediatric ICU at 3 in the morning. None of that works if the room gets hot. A data center is underneath all the marketing, a machine for moving heat. Tens of thousands of processors turn electricity into computation, and computation into warmth, and if the cooling ever falls behind the heat, the temperature climbs, and silicon has a temper. Push it past its limit and it doesn't politely slow down. It fails. Sometimes it fails on fire. Wes Caro was the man who made sure the cooling never fell behind. He was 51, built like a retired lineman with reading glasses he wore on a cord, and hands that had rebuilt every chiller and pump and air handler in that building at least once. He'd been at Basalt since the concrete was still curing. He knew the facility the way you know a house you built, where it creaked, where it sulked, which pump had a bearing that would go in about a year, which cooling unit you never quite trusted on the hottest afternoons. He drove a 15-year-old truck and packed his lunch and lived in a small house with a teenage son, and by every appearance in the hallway he was exactly what a founder like Dax Merrill filed him as an operator. A hands guy. Overhead. The kind of person a company has to have and never has to respect. Here is what Dax Merrill did not understand about Wes Caro, and it's the whole engine of what happened. Most experts protect their knowledge. They hoard it because knowledge that only lives in your head is job security. It makes you indispensable, unfireable, the one guy they can never let go. That's the oldest survival strategy in every technical field. Make sure it dies with me. Wes did the exact opposite on purpose for 9 years. He taught. Constantly. Compulsively. Every procedure he knew he wrote down and drilled into whoever would sit still. He ran Saturday training nobody was paid for. He turned nervous 24-year-olds into operators who could run the room in their sleep. He built runbooks and taped diagrams inside cabinet doors and made every junior engineer walk him through the emergency shutdown until they could do it blindfolded. People told him he was crazy. You're training your own replacement, Wes. You're making yourself disposable. And Wes Caro would say the thing that turned out on one specific night to be the most important thing anyone at Halcyon ever said. A man who's the only one who knows how to do something can be owned. Somebody with power figures out. You're the only one who can keep the thing running, and they've got you. They can make you do anything because the whole place falls down if you walk. The only way to never be that man is to make sure you're never the only one who knows. He'd tap the run book. I don't want to be indispensable. Indispensable is just a nice word for trapped. I want to be replaceable because a replaceable man is a free man. he can always say no. He had spent 9 years making himself free by making everyone around him competent. He just hadn't told anyone that the freedom was the point. The person Wes had taught most was Kayla Osei. Kayla was 27, 4 years out of school, and she had come to Basalt terrified a smart kid convinced she'd be found out. Wes had spent 4 years quietly turning her into the best critical ops engineer in the building. He never made her feel small. When she made her one big mistake, a valve lined up wrong during a maintenance window, he'd walked her through fixing it and then said, "Now you'll never do it again," which makes you more valuable than the people who've never been tested, and she'd have walked into fire for him after that. She was on shift that night, and the other person Wes had taught this is the part that matters later, so plant it now, was his son. Theo Caro was 15 and had grown up around the facility the way some kids grow up around a garage. Wes had brought him in on quiet weekends since he was 10. Let him coil cables and label things, taught him what the temperature graphs meant and why the room lived at 72, and what the big red mushroom button on the wall did, and most of all, who to call and what to say when something goes wrong. Theo could read a cooling dashboard better than half the people Halcyon paid. He knew Kayla. He knew the building's phone tree. He knew because his father had drilled it into him like a fire drill, that if the room ever got hot, the first thing you protect is not the money. It's the load that people's lives depend on. Theo thought it was boring mostly. The way kids think the important things are boring right up until the night they aren't. If you wanted proof that Wes Caro's whole strange philosophy actually worked, that giving your knowledge away makes a place stronger, not weaker, you only had to ask about the night 2 summers back when Wes wasn't even in the state. He'd been at a lake with Theo phone off first real vacation in 3 years. And at 2 a.m. a coolant pump had failed in the exact way pumps fail at 2 a.m., and the on-call operator had been Kayla 8 months into the job alone on a night shift with a falling cooling loop and a room full of other people's data. In a normal shop, a hoard the knowledge shop, the kind where one guru keeps it all in his head, that's a disaster. The guru's unreachable, nobody else knows the failover, the room cooks, and everyone spends the next morning explaining to customers why their data went dark. That's not what happened at Basalt, because Wes had drilled this exact scenario into Kayla on a Saturday with the pump powered down, walking her through it 3 times until she could do it half asleep. So at 2 a.m. alone, 25 years old, Kayla Osei rolled the load to the redundant loop, isolated the dead pump, held the room at a rock-steady 72, and had it stabilized before the temperature moved 2 degrees. She never called Wes. She didn't need to. He found out when he got back and read the log and saw a flawless save with his student's name on it, and he'd been prouder of that than of any night he'd run the room himself. That, he told the plant manager the next week, is the whole job. Not me being a hero, me being unnecessary at 2 a.m. A room that only works when one specific guy is awake isn't a reliable room. It's a hostage. Dax Merrill had been in that meeting. He'd heard Wes say it. And what Dax took away from it, you could see him take it away, was not this man has built something resilient. It was this man just told me he's replaceable. He filed it under useful. He'd remember it later on the night he decided Wes was safe to threaten because Dax Merrill only ever heard the half of that sentence that told him who he could push. He never heard the other half. The half that said a replaceable man is a free man. The half that was about to cost him everything he had. Dax Merrill was 38 and he was 4 hours from either saving his company or losing it. And he had decided that the difference came down to the room never blinking. Halcyon Data Systems was burning cash. Dax had built it fast and loud on the strength of one promise repeated in every pitch deck: perfect uptime. Flawless. The most reliable facility in the region. And now he needed a new round of funding to survive the year, and the lead investors, the people who could write the check that kept the lights on, had asked to see the crown jewel. Not a slide. The real thing. A live tour of Basalt during peak load with dashboards on the wall showing green across the board so they could watch perfection with their own eyes before they wired the money. The showcase was set for that evening. Green dashboards, a glass gallery overlooking the operations floor, champagne quietly after. Dax genuinely believed this was leadership. That's the thing to understand about him because it's what makes him dangerous instead of cartoonish. He wasn't a man twirling a mustache. He was a man who had been told by a decade of investors and podcasts and his own reflection that great founders will it into existence, that reality is a thing you bend if you push hard enough, that every wall is really a door if you're bold enough to walk at it. He'd bent reality before. He'd made payroll on fumes-closed customers who'd said no twice, talked a landlord out of an eviction. It had always worked, and every time it worked, it taught him the same wrong lesson, that the rules were for people without enough nerve. He had never once been in a room where the wall was made of physics. There was one problem, and Wes had flagged it in writing 4 days earlier. Cooling Unit C, RAC6. The one Wes had never fully trusted was degrading. Not dead, but limping, losing capacity on hot afternoons. And the forecast for showcase night was a record October heat that would push the whole cooling plant to its limit right at demo time. Wes's memo had been simple. Take CRAC6, offline shed, non-critical load for the evening run, conservative. We can be safe or we can be spectacular. On the hottest night of the year at peak load in front of an audience, we cannot be both. I recommend safe. Dax had read the memo. Dax had heard shed load and not spectacular, and understood only that his engineer wanted to make the crown jewel look ordinary on the one night it needed to look flawless. He had not replied to the memo. He'd just decided privately that when the moment came, he'd handle it his way. The clock started at 6:15 that evening, and it was a temperature. The investors arrived. The heat outside hadn't broken. Inside on the operations floor, the cooling plant was working at the edge of its capacity, and CRAC6 was wheezing, and the cold aisle temperature, normally a rock-steady 72, had drifted to 74. Wes was watching it climb 1/10 of a degree at a time, already moving to shed non-critical load exactly as his memo said, when Dax came onto the floor with the investors in the glass gallery behind him, and saw on the big dashboard a number that was not green. A cooling capacity warning. Amber. Visible. And Dax Merrill made the decision that a certain kind of person always makes. He decided the problem was not the heat. The problem was the warning. 6:40 p.m. Cold aisle 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Wes. Dax pulled him to the corner of the control room, bright and low. Why is there an amber on my board with the investors right there? Make it green. It's amber because it's true, Wes said. CRAC6 is failing and it's 90 plus outside. I'm shedding non-critical load right now to buy margin. In 20 minutes we're stable and boring. That's the good outcome tonight, boring. Rung 1. I don't want boring, I want green. You cannot shed load in the middle of a demo. The dashboards show utilization dropping. It looks like we can't handle scale. That's the opposite of the story. Dax's jaw worked. Put the load back and make the cooling number green. I can't make the cooling number green. The cooling isn't green. I can fake the display or I can fix the room, and only one of those keeps 10,000 people's data cold. Rung 2. Dax looked at the wall where the temperature ticked to 77, and then he pointed at the small brass switch on the panel. The thermal interlock. The automatic safety that would trip the room into protective shutdown if the temperature crossed the red line. That thing's going to trip and take the room down in front of my investors, Dax said. Bypass it. Disable the auto shutdown for the next 2 hours. We ride out the demo, cooling catches up overnight when it's cool and nobody sees a blink. Wes went very still. That interlock is the only thing that shuts the room down before it catches fire, he said quietly. You're asking me to remove the smoke detector because you don't like the sound it makes. If CRAC6 drops and there's no interlock, this room goes into thermal runaway in front of your investors and it doesn't blink. It dies. Servers racks the hospital load, all of it, and maybe the building. You're being dramatic. It's a hot night, not a fire. It's a hot night plus a failing cooling unit plus peak load plus you wanting to remove the one safety that covers all three. I've watched this exact stack of decisions kill a room before. I won't line them up again. Rung 3. Dax Merrill heard I've watched this before and did not get curious, which tells you everything. He got impatient. He stepped in close and his voice went cold and quiet, and he reached for the sentence that had never yet failed him with an employee, because Dax had checked a startup founder always checks. And he'd seen a 51-year-old operator, single dad, one income, a kid at home. A job that was his whole identity, no soft landing anywhere. Wes, I like you, so I'm only going to say this once in the nicest way I can. A breath. Follow my orders or leave. Bypass the interlock or set your badge down and walk out tonight on the biggest night this company has ever had, and good luck explaining to the next employer why you abandoned your post during a demo. Think about your son before you answer. Rung 4. He'd said it in front of the shift Kayla, 2 other operators, the amber glow of the board. Think about your son, the leash named out loud. And Wes Carroll reached up and took his badge off his lanyard. The room expected the fold, the little collapse, The okay 2 hours off the record. Everyone expected it because that's what happens when a powerful man names your kid. Wes set the badge on the desk. He logged out of his console, clean, deliberate, the way you close down a machine you love and won't see again. He looked at Kayla for exactly 1 second, and he said the only sentence he spoke on his way out, and he said it to her, not to Dax. You know how to protect the room. You know what matters most in it. Everything I taught you was for a night like this. Then he put his mug and his son's photo in a canvas bag, zipped it, and walked out through the glass gallery past a row of investors who watched a big, quiet man leave in the middle of a party and had no idea they'd just watched the only adult in the building go home. The glass door sighed shut. And Dax Merrill turned to his operations manager, a compliant 30-year-old named Trip Hollis who had wanted Wes's job for 2 years, and said, "Trip, bypass the interlock." And Trip Hollis, who did not know the room the way Wes knew the room, who had never rebuilt. C6, with his own hands, who had skipped most of the Saturday trainings because they weren't paid. Trip Hollis said, "On it," and reached for the small brass switch. Here's what the building told itself in the 90 minutes after Wes left, and it's the cruel part, because it's exactly wrong. The night shift and the sales team and the 2 operators who'd watched it happen came to the same conclusion. A scared building always comes to, Wes bailed. On the biggest night in company history, with everything on the line, the guy who was supposed to keep the room alive picked up his bag and walked and left a kid like Trip holding a facility at the edge. By the time the story reached the parking lot, it had hardened into contempt. 9 years and he ran the second the CEO leaned on him, some legend, left us to burn. Kayla Osei didn't believe it because she'd heard what he said to her. Everything I taught you was for a night like this. That wasn't a man running. That was a man handing her something. But she was 27 and the CEO was standing right there and the temperature was climbing, and when she opened her mouth, Trip said, "He quit, Kayla, focus." And she looked at the board and said nothing and hated herself for it, which is a thing that happens to good people in hot rooms more than anyone admits. Wes drove home. He did not call anyone. He did not warn the investors or phone a reporter or post a thread. He walked in, set down his bag, and started making dinner for his son because there was a 15-year-old who needed to eat, and there was nothing left for Wes to do at a facility he no longer had a badge for. He knew what they were saying about him. That was the part that would have broken a lesser man. He'd stood in enough control rooms to know exactly how it looked from the outside, the legend who ran the second it got hard, and he knew there was no version of the next hour where he came out of it looking like anything but a quitter, because the only people who'd understand the truth were the ones still inside the building he'd just been thrown out of. He could have called someone, explained, defended himself, started building the record that would clear his name. He didn't, because the room was about to be in trouble and the people in it, Kayla the night crew, a hospital full of kids 3 states away, had bigger problems than what he was going to look like in the morning. Doing the right thing and getting credit for it are 2 different transactions he'd have told you, and most nights only one of them is even on the table. Take the first one. The second one shows up late or never, and if you did the thing for the second one, you were never really doing the thing. So he browned onions and let a building full of people call him a coward, and waited to find out whether 9 years of teaching had actually built what he'd hoped it built. Theo took one look at him. "You're home early, and you've got your bag." "I don't work at Halcyon anymore, bud." "Since when?" "Since about an hour ago." Wes kept his voice level, stirring. "The CEO told me to turn off a safety system so a room would look good for some investors. I said no. He told me to do it or leave." He shrugged, tired. "So I left." Theo sat down slowly at the counter. He knew that room. He knew what a safety interlock was. His dad had drilled it into him for 5 years. And he knew the way a kid knows when a grown-up is being calm on purpose, that his father had just done something enormous and quiet. "Which safety system?" Theo said. "The thermal interlock on the main floor." Theo's face changed. "Dad, it's like 95 degrees out. If they bypass the interlock and CRAC6 goes..." He was on his feet. "St. Bridget's is on that floor. The hospital load. The PICU monitors run out of basalt. If the room cooks..." "Kayla knows," Wes said. "I told her. She knows to protect the hospital load first. She knows how to pull it to the disaster recovery site. I taught her." He looked at his son. "It's not on me anymore, Theo. I'm not the only one who knows how. That was the whole point of the last 9 years, so that it would never be on just one man." But Theo was already looking at the clock. And Theo, who idolized Kayla, who knew the phone tree, who had watched his father be undermined and dismissed, and finally pushed out by people who thought a hands guy didn't matter, was doing the math a 15-year-old does when the boring thing suddenly isn't boring. "You said Kayla knows," Theo said. "But is Kayla in charge? Or is the CEO in charge and Kayla's the one who just watched him fire you for saying no?" Wes Caro stopped stirring, because his son had just asked the one question he hadn't let himself ask. Wes had told Kayla to protect the hospital load. He had trusted the system he'd built. And the system he'd built was good, but Theo had put his finger on the crack in it, and the crack was this: in a room where the CEO has just made an example of the one man who said no. The person who knows the right thing to do is not the same as the person allowed to do it. At Basalt at that moment the temperature was 84, and climbing the interlock was bypassed, and Kayla Osei was standing at her console, knowing exactly what needed to happen. Start pulling non-critical load prep the hospital failover, and being told by Trip Hollis on Dax's orders to keep everything up, do not shed the dashboard, stay full for the demo. She was one command away from saving the room, and she was frozen because the last person who'd defied Dax Merrill in that room had been walked out 90 minutes ago. Theo didn't know all of that, but he knew enough. And Theo did the thing his father would never have done because his father had decided long ago that you do the right thing and you don't get to control what people think of you. And Theo, at 15, was not yet willing to wait quietly for the world to catch up. He called Kayla. Not the front desk. Kayla's cell, a number he had because she'd helped him with a science project 2 years back. She picked up on the second ring because it was Wes's kid, and Theo said fast the thing his father had drilled into him since he was 10. "Kayla, it's Theo. Is the interlock really bypassed? Because if CRAC6 drops, the room's gonna run away, and St. Bridget's is on that floor. You have to pull the hospital load to DR now before it gets hot enough to corrupt a right. My dad said the first thing you protect is the load people's lives depend on. Not the demo, the hospital. He said you know how." And Kayla Osei, 27 years old, standing in an 85-degree room being told to keep the dashboards pretty heard. A 15-year-old say my dad said you know how heard. Wes Caro's voice come out of his son's mouth and something in her unlocked. "I know how," she said. She hung up. She sat down at her console. And while Trip Hollis was in the glass gallery smiling at investors, Kayla Osei quietly initiated the emergency migration of the entire St. Bridget's Children's Hospital load off the failing facility and onto the disaster recovery site 3 states away, exactly the way Wes had drilled her a dozen times on a dozen unpaid Saturdays. It took 11 minutes. When it finished at 6:58 p.m., every monitor in a pediatric ICU 300 miles away kept beeping without a single interruption, running now on hardware. In a cool building that was not about to catch fire, and not one nurse, not one parent, not one child ever knew that anything had happened at all. That was Theo Caro's move. A phone call from a kitchen. It saved the only thing in that building that actually mattered, and it happened 11 minutes before the room began to die. Wes found out his son had made the call about 30 seconds after it connected because Theo told him, and Wes Caro looked at his 15-year-old for a long moment, and what he felt was not anger. "I taught Kayla so it wouldn't be on one man," Wes said slowly. "And you just figured out it was still on one man until you called. You found the hole in the whole thing I built. Are you mad?" "No," Wes said. "No, bud. I'm the opposite of mad." 7:40 p.m. Cold aisle 91 degrees Fahrenheit. CRAC6 dropped. It didn't limp anymore. A bearing Wes had flagged in a memo 4 days earlier finally seized, and the failing cooling unit went from limping to dead, and the cooling plant, already at its limit on a record-hot night, fell behind the heat all at once. And there was no interlock to catch it. Trip had bypassed it on Dax's order. The one system designed to trip the room into a safe protective shutdown the instant this happened had been switched off because it might have blinked in front of investors. So the room did not shut down safely. The temperature entered runaway. 7:48 p.m. 97 degrees Fahrenheit. The first servers began to thermally throttle and then fault. Racks started dropping. On the big dashboard in front of the investors, the ocean of green began section by section to turn red, not a blink, not a dip, a spreading stain. 7:51 p.m., 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The hot aisles hit a temperature no human should stand in. Operators pulled back from the floor. On the wall, an entire pod of the bank's overnight processing went dark at once, and one of the investors, a woman who understood exactly what she was looking at, set down her champagne glass very carefully, the way you set something down when you've decided to leave. 7:55 p.m. 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire suppression system pre-alarmed. Somewhere in the room, a rack's battery backup cooked past its tolerance began to vent with a sound like a kettle from hell. The air handlers screamed at a load they couldn't move. And the demo, the flawless, perfect crown jewel demo, became in real time in front of the exact people Dax Merrill had flown in to impress a catastrophe with a temperature readout climbing on the wall like a fever chart. Here is the confrontation, and it happened live in the glass gallery with the investors right there. Dax Merrill stood in front of the people who held his company's survival in a wire transfer and watched his flawless facility turn red on the wall and did what men like Dax do at the exact moment they should stop. He blamed. "This is an operations failure," he said too loud to the room, to the investors, to anyone. "My facilities lead walked off the job tonight, abandoned his post in the middle of the demo. This is his negligence, not Dax." Kayla Osei's voice cut across the gallery. She had come up from the floor, and she was not frozen anymore because a 15-year-old had reminded her whose training she was running on. "He didn't abandon anything. He told you CRAC6 was failing 4 days ago in writing. He told you tonight, an hour ago, not to bypass the interlock. You fired him for refusing to do the exact thing that is happening right now. He left. He left because you told him to follow my orders or leave. I was standing right there, we all were." She pointed at the red wall. "That's not his negligence up there, Dax. That's your order. That's what your order looks like when it finishes." And Dax Merrill, cornered live in front of the money, reached for the last thing in the box. He got out his phone and called Wes Caro and put it on speaker without meaning to, because his hands were shaking and the whole gallery heard it. Wes, thank God. Look, whatever happened tonight, we can fix it. I need you back here right now. Name your number. I'll triple it, equity, whatever. Just get in here and save the room." And Wes. Caro's voice came out of the phone, calm, into a glass gallery full of investors and a wall gone red. "Dax, the interlock you told me to bypass is the only thing that would have caught this. It's too late to save what's in that room. Those racks are gone. They were gone the minute CRAC6 dropped with no failsafe. I can't fix that. Nobody can. It's physics now, not management." A pause. "But you can still shut the power to the floor before the fire gets worse, and Kayla knows exactly how because I taught her, and she doesn't need me in the building to do it." "She never did. That was the whole point you never understood." "Wes?" Dax's voice cracked. "I'll give you anything." "You're offering me a bigger leash," Wes said. "That's all a raise ever is from a man who's already shown you what he does when you say no. I'm not coming back to save your demo, but tell Kayla to pull the floor power now and tell her the hospital load is already safe. She moved St. Bridget's an hour ago while you were pouring champagne. Not one kid on a monitor ever felt a thing. She did that, not you." A beat. "That's the last thing I've got to say to you, Dax. Kayla's got the room. She always did." The line went dead. And Dax Merrill stood in a glass box in front of the investors, who were now quietly, one by one, picking up their own coats, because you do not wire $20 million to a man whose flawless crown jewel just caught fire on a Tuesday because he'd ordered the smoke detector unplugged. He did not apologize. That's the detail to keep. Even then, even ruined watching the wall bleed red. Dax Merrill turned to the nearest investor and said, "This is recoverable. This is one facility. The fundamentals are still selling, still certain cold all the way down." Nobody was listening. They were watching Kayla Osei on the floor below, calmly and expertly killing the power to a dying room exactly the way a man in a 15-year-old truck had taught her to on a Saturday for free years ago, so that this night would never depend on him being in the building. The woman investor, the one who'd set down her champagne 3 minutes earlier, was the last to leave, and she stopped in front of Dax on her way out. She'd run operations at a real infrastructure company for 20 years before she ever wrote a check, and she looked at the red wall and then at Dax, and she said the thing that ended the evening more completely than the fire had. "Your engineer flagged that unit 4 days ago. In writing. You had a memo." It wasn't a question. She'd already heard the whole thing from Kayla on the way up. "He told you not to bypass the interlock an hour before it happened, and when he wouldn't do it for you, you found a boy who would." She pulled her coat on. I don't invest in founders who fire the one person telling them the truth. I invest in the person telling the truth. And you just fired him out the front door in front of me and called it leadership. She glanced down at the floor at Kayla working the shutdown with steady hands. Whoever taught that woman down there, that's who I'd have written the check to. Not you. Not ever you. She left. So did the rest of the money. And Dax Merrill stood alone in a glass box above a room he had ordered to death, still even then running the numbers on how to spin it. Because a man like Dax does not have a bottom, he only has a next sentence. While below him, a junior engineer and 300 miles away a pediatric ICU full of sleeping children who would never know his name went on being perfectly quietly fine. Dax Merrill did not get his funding. The lead investors were gone before the fire trucks left, and the round collapsed within the week. And Halcyon Data Systems, a company built entirely on the promise of perfect uptime, could not survive the video of its flagship facility burning during its own investor showcase. It was sold for parts inside 4 months. Dax's own post-mortem, the one he circulated to the board, blamed a facilities lead who abandoned his post, which was by then a sentence that made everyone who read it think slightly less of Dax because the whole industry had heard by then what the facilities lead had actually refused to do. He is still at this writing explaining. He will be explaining for a long time. Trip Hollis. The man who flipped the switch learned what Wes could have told him for free if he'd ever come to a Saturday, that the person who executes the order owns the consequence right alongside the person who gave it. His name is on the bypass log. He wanted Wes's job for 2 years and got instead the one piece of Wes's job that Wes had never wanted anyone to have the hand on the switch when the daylight came. Kayla Osai became something that night, and it stuck. When St. Bridget's Children's Hospital learned weeks later in the incident review that their live PICU load had been quietly expertly migrated off a burning facility 11 minutes before the room died with zero interruption to a single monitor, they didn't want to thank the company. They wanted to hire the engineer. Kayla now runs critical facilities for the hospital's own data operations, where the load she protects is measured in heartbeats, and where the first thing she teaches every new hire is a rule she got from a man in a 15-year-old truck. Don't be the only one who knows. Teach it away. A person who's the only one who knows can be owned. Teach it to everyone and you're free, and so is the room. The rest resolved the way it resolves. The servers in the room were a total loss. The bank's processing, the university's cluster, the streaming service expensive, insured recoverable gone. And every one of those companies eventually understood that the only load in that building that survived without a scratch was the one a 15-year-old and a junior engineer had decided to save first. Because a man had taught them that some data is just money, and some data is a child on a monitor, and you protect the child first. And the 40 people who'd spent 90 minutes calling Wes a coward in the parking lot found out all at once what the walkout had actually been, and there was no crowd on the porch scene because Wes didn't want one. But Kayla did drive over one Saturday and stand on his step and say, "I froze, and then Theo called and I heard you. And Wes said you didn't freeze. You paused and then you ran the room better than I would have." And that was the whole conversation, and both of them understood it was enough. There was a reason Wes Caro treated a safety interlock like something sacred, and he'd never told anyone, and it's the last thing you need. 19 years earlier, Wes had been the young operator, the Trip Hollis, the kid at the switch. He'd worked at a facility run by a man a lot like Dax, and one night under pressure, that man had ordered a safety bypass to protect a number, and Wes, 22, scared needing the job with a baby on the way, had done it. He'd flipped the switch, and the room hadn't died that night. It had gotten lucky. But a colleague of Wes's, a man named Ruben, who'd tried to stop it, had been standing at the wrong panel when a cooked battery bank arc flashed, and Ruben had spent 4 months in a burn unit and never worked again, and Wes Caro had spent 19 years knowing that the hand on the switch had been his. He'd gone home that night, new baby terrified, and decided 2 things. That he would never again be the hand on the bypass. And the part it took him years to understand, that the way you make sure you can always say no is not by being brave in the moment. It's by arranging your whole life and your whole trade so that no one can ever make the refusal too expensive to afford. For Wes, that didn't mean money. It meant this never be the only one who knows. Because the trap that caught him at 22 was that the boss owned the room, and Wes had needed the boss. So Wes spent the next 19 years making sure that he personally was never the load-bearing wall of anybody's operation. Teaching drilling, writing it all down, handing his mastery to every Kayla he could find. So that on the day a Dax Merrill finally leaned on him, He could set down his badge and walk out, and the room would still be in competent hands. He made himself replaceable on purpose because he'd learned at 22 that indispensable is just another word for owned. He'd built his freedom out of generosity. You cannot hold a man hostage with a room when he's already taught the room to a dozen other people. There's nothing to threaten. The leash isn't attached to anything. And the proof of it was a phone call from his own kitchen, a 15-year-old who knew what to do because his father had refused for a decade to be the only one who knew. Theo brought it up weeks later at the counter over the terrible movie Popcorn. "All those Saturdays you dragged me in there," Theo said, "making me learn the boring stuff. The temps, the phone tree, the shutdown. That was so it wouldn't be stuck in just your head. Wasn't it?" Wes put down the bowl. "I never taught you a trade, bud," he said. "I taught you a way out of a room, so that someday when somebody with power over you says do the wrong thing or lose everything, you're not the only one holding it and you can afford to say no." He tapped the counter. Most people can't say no, not because they're weak, because somebody made sure they were the only one who could keep the thing running and then owned them with it. Don't ever let anybody make you the only one who knows Theo. Teach it away. Every time. That's not you giving up power. That's you buying the only freedom that's real. Theo was quiet for a second. "That's such a dad answer." "Yeah," Wes said. "It's the only one there is." Theo never complained about a Saturday again, and when his class was assigned an essay that spring write about a time someone showed you what courage looks like, he didn't write about the fire or the red wall or the CEO who lost everything. He wrote about a man who taught a whole building his job on purpose, so that the day he had to walk out of it, the room would be just fine without him. All right, let's be honest with each other. Wes Caro isn't real. Neither is Dax Merrill or the basalt facility or the small brass switch on the wall. But that switch is real. Every workplace has one: the safety, the standard, the line. And somewhere in almost every career, there's a night when someone with power over your paycheck tells you to flip it to unplug the smoke detector because the noise is inconvenient and makes it very clear what saying no will cost you. And here's the thing. This story is really about the part that isn't about data centers at all. Most people can't say no in that moment. Not because they're cowards, because they're trapped. And a huge amount of the time, the trap is one specific thing somebody made them the only one who could keep the thing running and then use that against them. You can't leave. You're the only one who knows. The whole place falls down without you. It feels like power. It's a cage. Wes Caro beat it in the least dramatic way imaginable over 19 years by doing the opposite of what everyone told him. He refused to be indispensable. He gave his knowledge away to Kayla, to a dozen operators, to his own kid, until the day a powerful man leaned on him and discovered there was nothing to lean on because the room didn't need Wes anymore. Wes had made sure of it. That was the whole point. So here's the real question, and it's about you. The thing you're proudest of being the only one who can do, is that your power? Or is it your leash? Because the day someone tells you to obey or walk. The only thing that will decide who you get to be is whether the world falls down when you leave. And if it does, if you're the only one who knows, then you don't own that knowledge. It owns you. Tell me down in the comments. Be honest, I read them. And if you've ever been kept in a job, a role, a room by being made the only one who could type, teach it away below and go see how many people are standing in that hot room with you. It's more than you'd think. It always is. If this one landed hit like so it reaches the next person about to be told to flip a switch and subscribe, there's a new one every week. Take care of each other out there. And don't make yourself indispensable. Make yourself free.